will against our laws. And I think what one is not saying they shall have no rights, but one is saying they should be removed to Rwanda, and then whatever claims they have can then be dealt with.
And it's fair to say that people who've come here unlawfully, illegally, should have different rights from British citizens.
Indeed. I think that's a very powerful point. The idea that you set on our shores illegally and you have exactly the same rights as a citizen who is here, or born here, or here at any rate here perfectly legally, is not sound.
So what you're saying about the bill is that it asserts the supremacy of Parliament quite rightly. It overturns the Supreme Court decision, quite rightly, in line with our Constitution. But then it doesn't give that any practical effect, so the courts could still be ruling on potentially hundreds of cases, if not thousands of cases, until kingdom come.
I think it's not fair to say it doesn't give it any practical effect, because reversing the Supreme Court decision is an important thing to unclog the
so that's good.
Complete blockage, indeed.
So it makes sense to get it into committee and see if you can improve it, rather than trying to stop it at the second reading stage?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the politics of whether, whether it's best to stop it at second reading or onwards. But the problem with the bill is that it would require, I think, a radical rewrite to make it properly effective. I can't see any easy, quick amendments that could be done to it.
And there's the issue of Article 39, where the European Court has a claimed right, never agreed by this country, to issue effectively injunctions. This bill says that ministers will be able to ignore those, but it doesn't say that ministers will be able to break international law. Is that a problem?
The problem here is actually the Rule 39 indications, as they are. They're actually indications. They're not injunctions, although people have been talking about them as injunctions and treating them as if they're binding. The better view is they're actually not binding in international law. However, the government legal service and people who seem to worship the Strasbourg court seem to take the view that they should be treated as binding. And the real problem we have is that I think this bill, if implemented, will be shortly followed by a lot of individuals petitioning the Strasbourg court. There will be Rule 39 indications issued, and the government has to have the the toughness of saying we're going to disregard them. And
overruling the government legal service, which wants to follow them.
Yes, indeed.
Right, so the government may not be so much bound as egg-bound. Anyway, thank you very much, Martin. We heard from my friend Marc Francois earlier on today, the chairman of the ERG, speaking about the release of the review from the Star Chamber.
We all want to stop the boats. There have been 2 legislative attempts at this already. The Nationalities and Borders Act, that didn't quite work. The Illegal Immigration Act, that didn't quite work. So this is kind of 3 strikes and you're out, isn't it? So what is really important is, if we're going to put a bill through Parliament, to have a piece of legislation which is fit for purpose. As the bill is currently drafted, it isn't.
I'm joined now by my panel, former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, what do you think of this? Do you think the government should just be a bit bolder and say clearly that we're leaving the European Convention on Human Rights?
Absolutely staggering, the amount of airtime, of our money, of legal trained minds that are being focused on really what is a minuscule issue given what's going down in the world around us at the moment. I happen to know, because I had good spies on the case, you were in Kent today where most of these boat individuals arrived. Did you feel flooded or inundated, as the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman suggested? Were you under siege and imperilled?
Well, I was with you, so I was under siege. I was under siege by the left.
But let's be honest, actually, our green and present land isn't being threatened by a few thousand of the world's most vulnerable individuals. And no, but you may scoff, but actually what you've been talking over there, it sounded all very decent. You're wearing your little pinstripe suits and talking in legal jargon, but actually it's dangerous, the idea of yet again ripping up our relationship with Europe, going one step beyond kiboshing the EU, and this time it's the ECHR, which predates the EU, an original founding signature that we were. This is about defending universal declaration of human rights.
I would love to just pick you up on a couple of things there, that these are not the most vulnerable. They are the people who have had the wherewithal to pay and to get themselves onto boats to get across the channel. I will give you one example where I live near Skegness, and very sadly there is a court case going on at present where a female was allegedly raped in the local park. The man accused of it had been in the country for 40 days. He had been taken from Kent to Skegness. When asked whether he was at any risk, he said no. I left Egypt 4 years ago, where my wife and children still are. I moved to Italy, which was very nice, but I got bored. I went to France, but I thought England was a better bet. But this is not the most vulnerable in society. And I'd
That's
also
a failure of governance on our part if we've let a random man get off a boat as an Egyptian national to wander freely and rape.
All random men, on the whole, who have done precisely that.
Not all of them have done that. Let's be clear. Not all of them have raped.
Like no, of course not. But they have got off boats and they have disappeared into our country.
So hang on a minute. We're spending £8 million a day, £8 million a day processing asylum seekers, and we can't even keep tabs on them. Is that the state of British government?
They are put on police bail. That is the system. It is failing. It is failing the British people. It is also failing the asylum seekers. It would be far better to send them to another country to be processed quickly, because we seem incapable of doing it here. And when we look at the European Convention on Human Rights, the rights it conveys are ones that we have had in law in Britain for time immemorial. Are we going to really scrap the right to life, or perhaps the right to liberty?
This is a really interesting...
We have given other countries...
Come on, you better let Dr Dunlop get a word in edgeways.
OK, you've just suggested that we have laws and courts sufficiently strong in this country that we don't need the ECHR.
Yes.
No, because the Supreme Court has said we must not send these individuals to Rwanda because in English common law you cannot send someone to danger. And what have they done in Parliament? Oh, let's just try and rewrite that. Oh no, Rwanda is safe. Not because it is safe, but because they can. They've trampled on the rule of law, which is why we need safeguards in
Well, there we go.
I'm raising my voice.
Thank you to my panel. I said they were feisty. I hope they're not going to come to blows, perhaps later. Coming up, Westminster whispers are suggesting ministers regret ousting a certain former blonde-haired Prime Minister. And don't forget, the chickens are running, and I'm not talking about Tory MPs.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akweer, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Exclusive.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing tomorrow's make-or-break Rwanda vote, and you've been sending in your punchy thoughts. Steve says, Jacob, we voted to leave, say we should abolish anything to do with the EU. And Elizabeth makes a good point. Leave the ECHR if you wish, but personally, as the French have demonstrated, it can be ignored if a country chooses to do so, but it seems that our MPs and those in authority choose to abide by its laws. That's a very good point. Perhaps for once, mon ami, we should be a little bit more French. With all the turmoil chasing the Prime Minister at the moment, everything from the renewed Rwanda plan to the COVID inquiry to civil service wokery, 2 subjects we'll be covering shortly, it's no wonder that The Times is reporting whispers from Westminster have suggested a number of ministers are regretting the ousting of Boris Johnson. And let's be honest, Boris Johnson was a natural-born leader whose instincts were right on the big questions, whether it was Brexit, immigration or Ukraine. But just over a year ago, the pressure from the metropolitan elite grew too strong, and many of his ministers succumbed to the tsunami of hysteria heading towards 10 Downing Street. It was a chronicler of Henry II who described him when he died after a tumultuous final few months as a lion savaged by jackals. Little did he know, that 12th century chronicler, that such a description would apply so aptly to the current Prime Minister's predecessor, once removed. Well, I'm joined now, continue to be joined now, by former Brexit Party MEP, to whom I'm related but only by blood, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Annunciata, let us admit it frankly, as a business people should, it's been no end of a lesson, it'll do us no end of good. We shouldn't have got rid of Boris. He was a great, charismatic leader, and we're worse off without him.
Be careful what you wish for. That I think people very rarely take into account what differences change can make. And they can make some changes in a very big way, and in other ways they make no difference at all. We were 10%, I think, as a party behind in the polls at the end of Boris's time, and we're now best part of 30 behind. It hasn't worked out as they hoped.
Tessa, wouldn't it be better for us all if Boris was still in charge?
The problem is with these Conservative MPs having a sort of change of heart. Ben Bradley, Lee Anderson, I believe he works here, doesn't he? It makes them look terribly...
Most Tory MPs do now,
yes,
as I'm glad to say.
Yes, I chose to keep you off the list. Because I'm about to say they seem terribly self-serving and thin-skinned. You know, they put their finger to the wind, try and work out which way it's blowing, and all they seem to care about is whether they get voted in at the next election. This isn't really serving in the public interest.
I hope you'll both forgive me for quoting myself, which is a terrible habit of politicians.
Yes.
But the key thing about Boris was that he had a mandate from the voters.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that to ignore the mandate and just get rid of him was disrespectful to electors.
They talk about houses having curb appeal, and Boris had voter appeal. And that gave him an ability to do things that other prime ministers, without having the mandate, cannot do. And I think losing that has very much weakened the party. But there does feel, and I'm afraid as an outsider and as a mere member of the party, like there is a disconnect between those of you in Westminster and the membership and the voters on the ground who actually wanted Boris, voted for Boris, and want proper Conservative policy.
But actually, I think we need to hold on to a key difference between membership of the Conservative Party and voters generally. His voter appeal had plummeted. He was found to have lied to Parliament. I think if this is the only option the Conservatives have to go forward, looking backwards at Boris, it suggests you really are in desperate stakes. I wonder if the appeal of Boris hasn't shot up because people are thinking, we could just pretend Rwanda never happened. This was Rishi's idea, stop the boats. We could move on to pastures new.
I do completely agree that going backwards is not the answer. Boris is not an MP anyway. The mechanics of trying to squeeze him in would be so tortuous, and it would just mean months of more uncertainty. I think we are where we are, and we've got to make the best of it. But we've got to make the best of it for the country, not for the individual.
Well, I've got to say, I think you're doing a very, very good job of confirming that we will have a fresh administration and a technocrat who leans to centre-left as opposed to one who leans to centre-right.
Well, there we go. I'd better let Tess occasionally get the last word. As promised, we also want to discuss the latest developments in the COVID inquiry. It's an odd investigation, as it seems to have decided its conclusions before it started and accepts the word of scientists as if they're demigods. Today, they were fixated on the question of the Eat Out, Help Out scheme, as anything that helped the economy, to their mind, seems to be bad. They do not question the arrogance of a scientist referring to his democratically appointed boss as Dr. Death the Chancellor. The scheme may not have been perfect, but the economy, no doubt, needed a boost. Well, Tessa, actually, I think Rishi's come out quite well of today's evidence. He was putting a good case against lockdown, warning that damaging things would happen and that there would be consequences. And surely that's what a Chancellor should do.
I mean, he was relatively assertive, wasn't he? And he pushed back and he made the point that he was keeping an eye on some of the most vulnerable workers, and they certainly do work in hospitality, making sure that industry stayed afloat, boosted to the tune of £840 million, even more than has been spent on Rwanda. Eye-watering sums being hurled around, and goodness knows what the current inquiry, incidentally, into COVID is costing. Yet another bill that we will have to foot. But back to Rishi's fortunes. I don't believe he's an immoral man, but certainly I remember gamboling out to spend free money on food I didn't need and then feeling devastated that we'd all been misled, because what they'd done was they'd opened these venues, but they hadn't taken into account what Rishi was planning to make sure they were full. There they were full, and then within a month, children who desperately needed to go to school were sent back home.
Well, I think
that was wicked.
But we should never have shut the schools, should we?
Never. That was
terrible mistake. But they're not going on about this at the inquiry.
With ongoing consequences.
But they're blaming it on the Help Out to Eat Out.
But they'd closed the schools earlier. They never really reopened them.
They say there's a direct correlation between Help Out to Eat Out and the school
It's very hard to see that.
Before they were shut again, everything opened and shut like a musical box. It was absolutely ridiculous. But this inquiry is not asking the right questions and is spending an awful lot of money. We're on well over 150 million already. It's adding up by the day, and it's going on for years.
OK, but it is spending a lot of money. But it's got pretty second-rate lawyers, hasn't it? Because I read that good lawyers get paid £1,000 an hour, and these ones are only getting 220 quid.
Your government put a limit on it.
Quite right. But it does mean we're getting we're getting B-class lawyers.
They're not asking the questions that need to be asked. They need to do international comparisons. Should we have locked down at all, or should we have been eating out not in very crowded venues, but keeping the economy ticking over that whole time? Should the mental health of our children and the diagnosis of cancer patients been put above other issues? And those are fundamental questions that aren't being addressed.
And that, you go back to, Boris the Saviour and how it would be good to reinvigorate or reincarnate him. It was a
He's not dead.
Fundamental, well, he is politically at the moment, thank the good Lord. But he actually failed to provide leadership. It was the first time in my life when I felt a kinship with the right, and that I didn't believe in lockdown. I live in Lambeth, a poor area. I saw the impact it had on the poorest. But actually, the Conservative Party failed to lead, and that is what this COVID inquiry has proven. There was no communication.
And your point on the poorest has just come out from Ian Duncan Smith's think tank, and they were the least well provided for by lockdown. Of course they were. And the most affected long term.
Of course they were. And the elderly, by the way, who died alone and now have no voice because they're dead.
And this inquiry doesn't care about any of that, as far as one can tell.
Absolutely doesn't seem to, and really is just trying to dig around in the dirt of interpersonal relationships and who swore at who, which, to be honest, doesn't matter in the slightest. What matters is, what do we do if this ever happens again?
But I think we do know that...
We've got to move on before I point out that it's who swore at whom, but never mind, Annunziata. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, in spite of my best efforts to abolish diversity courses in the civil service, they remain alive and well. Plus, could Chicken Run be the cultural phenomenon to turn British children vegan?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing Boris Johnson regrets and the COVID inquiry, and you have some forthright views on this. Karen says, as a voter and an ex-party member, if we brought back Boris, Starmer would be history. And Peter says, the Conservatives shot themselves in the foot when they got rid of Boris Johnson, and changing leaders hasn't worked out very well for them. Well, I was a minister for Boris Johnson. Indeed, I was Minister for Government Efficiency. And one of the items on the agenda was the abolition of the many diversity courses that had crept their way into the civil service, which were, of course, paid for by you. So to name a few, I encountered the likes of check yo privilege, de-biasing decision-making and conscious inclusion. And while I asked these courses be abolished, I'm afraid it wasn't enough to stop the tide. And now the Telegraph has exposed yet more wokery rife in Whitehall. It's been revealed that senior civil servants have been incentivised to lead diversity schemes with bonuses as the awards. A performance management document for the senior civil service revealed that employees must engage in extracurricular work, for example, involving leadership of functional initiative on capability building or diversity and inclusion. As my next guest points out, it's been estimated that there are upwards of 10,000 taxpayer-funded government employees whose work involves the promotion of diversity, equity and inclusion, which costs you, the taxpayer, over £500 million a year. So the question is, where does it end? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by the journalist, author and historian Leo McKinstry down the line. Leo, thank you so much. Your article in the Daily Mail today, I don't know whether it was a joy to read because it brought out so many facts, or was the most depressing thing I'd ever read that this nonsense is going on. Why isn't it being stopped when ministers, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister even, want it to end?
Yes, it's a bit like Sir Humphrey meets the Socialist Workers' Party, what's happened in Britain. And it's happening after 13 years of Conservative rule. 40 years ago, Ken Livingstone took charge of the GLC, and he introduced a lot of this modern wokery, identity politics, and more obsessed with the composition of your workforce than with actually delivery of the services. And it's amazing this has happened under a Tory government. And the top civil servants seem a law unto themselves, really. They pay no attention, no matter great efforts like you made to change the culture, seem to have very little impact. There's in a way, the woke politics feeds this culture of entitlement, and they feel that they're on this crusade of social justice, and therefore that they can just ignore the politicians because they've got a higher calling and a greater cause. And as you say, this is now costing over £500 million a year and 10,000 diversity officers.
And it goes across the whole gamut of public services, doesn't it? It's not just Whitehall, but it's local government, it's the police, it's the NHS. The NHS particularly, they were told by their minister, Steve Barclay, to stop having all these diversity people, and then they went out and advertised for a few more, just as if to spite him.
Absolutely. The NHS, it was estimated last year at 800 of these diversity officers. And as you say, when Steve Barclay tried to introduce a moratorium, they just recruited more. And in local government, there's over 800 of them as well. And there's 40 in Leicester County Council, we counted. And it just goes right across the public sector. And it's also, two other consequences of this are, so many public services now see their job is not to actually provide basic services to the public, but to indulge in a form of social engineering and indoctrination and promoting groupthink. And they also have this air of grievance in the workforce because identity politics encourages people to feel like victims. So that's in a way why I've got this explosion in mental health problems, sick leave soaring, and
it's almost, from your article this morning, it's almost as if being a white person is a bad thing. It makes you a bad person by virtue of your race, and they don't see that this in and of itself is discriminatory.
Absolutely. We now have reverse, in some cases, just straight racism against white people right through the public sector. And so many public services now have networks that encourage this identity politics and this cult of victimhood, where people see themselves not as public employees there to provide services to the British people, but they see themselves through the prism of various oppressed characteristics, for example, the Ministry of Defence was a vegan and vegetarian network, a Rastafarian network. The Department of Work and Pensions is a bowel disorder network. Jacob, did you know that the civil service is even setting up an introverts network?
I saw that in your piece, yes. Well, that seems a novel disability, to be an introvert. But thank you so much, Leo. Over to my panel. Annunciata, I don't suppose anyone's ever accused you of being an introvert. But
no, but I'm really tempted to join the cross-government introverts network, because I can only imagine that no one ever turns up. It's got to be an amazing organisation.
Tessa, do you want to defend this as our resident lefty?
I'm not actually a lefty. I'm a very reasonable centrist, but it is somewhat triggering walking into the GB News environment. Here you are moaning about discrimination against white people, and I'm sitting among a sea of white people in a positively discriminated, selected ex-Tory MP enclave. I mean, if ever there was an example of an organisation that actually needs
that it is
a diversity tsar.
Would you not admit that it is pretty offensive to what is about 85% of this country who are white, that they are paying through their taxes for courses on how to unlearn whiteness? Now, I didn't learn to be white. It just so happened as a quirk of genetics that that's how I was born. I didn't choose it and I didn't learn it. No,
has it?
but I can't unlearn it in my physical being. It is just offensive that we should have to. Learning tolerance is a very different thing, but I think trying to unlearn what you are is truly offensive to the majority of the country.
How short-termist we all are. Have we forgotten about the appalling mistreatment of the Windrush generation? They came in here in the 50s and 60s and then they're bullied back to their homes. And the investigation and the inquiry we had in 2020, Wendy Williams, and the outlines that she described as essential, most of which have been ridden roughshod over by the Conservative Party. And the only reason we have these diversity credentials and benchmarks is because of the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act and such horrifying things.
Windrush started under the previous Labour government, which decided to have the hostile environment, which then included...
That was Theresa May.
Which then included... No, she carried on with that, but it included British citizens, and that was absolutely disgraceful. It should never have included British citizens.
And
it was found to be disgraceful, as it should have been.
And one of Williams's findings was...
But you are not going to cure that. You are not going to cure that by Warwickshire County Council holding African drumming sessions.
They sound fun, though, don't they?
Not really.
Why should the taxpayers of Warwickshire pay for that? It might be fun for a few workers, but it's not going to solve any of the Warwickshire people's problems.
I'm so sorry, you're being anti-African. All workforces, for good morale, need the odd extra.
She's not being anti-African.
Well, why are you picking on the African drumming? I'm sure they also have WI coffee mornings and such
examples, such as introverts.
Wouldn't it be a waste of money if they were spending money teaching people to do Morris dancing? That's not the job of the state.
Yes. But actually, we all know that one is more productive if one is happy in one's workplace, which is why I come in here so regularly. Yes. Because it's a thrilling environment, and I believe it leads to spontaneity
and that is why in the private sector, people go out with each other after work, out of work hours, and get on with each other. They do not expect the bosses to pay for it all the time.
That is not true.
It certainly is in any professional environment I have worked in.
For a data scientist company, a private one in Brussels, and he has to go on obligatory meetings, and they have to go around finding statues and things like that.
That doesn't actually sound very fun.
But the point is, this is staple fare, and we pick on it because it's public sector. And
because we pay for it.
Yes, but in terms of our diversity, we all know that policing occurs best when groups and communities police
when you arrest baddies, that's when policing works best.
When we police our own. Well, 85% of the Met is white.
That West Yorkshire Police spends £500,000 a year on diversity officers.
Well,
and I bet they're almost all
good to hear. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, it's been nearly 400 years since Henry IV of France said, "I want there to be no peasant in my realm so poor that he will not have a chicken in his pot every Sunday." But could that be coming to a bitter end?
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana. I'm
not sure.
So join me, Nana Akweer, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new t-shirt.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing public sector diversity woes, and this is what you've got to say, Graham. Why don't ministers and secretaries of state sack the heads of these departments who won't do as instructed? I'm afraid we don't have the power to. And Paul, if the civil service and other government bodies wish to introduce woke positions directly opposing a government minister, let's just privatise the departments to maintain the same level of service for the same amount of money. They will manage out the wastage to make a profit. Well, that's a good point. The profit motive is much to be admired. And Brian is preempting our next segment. He says, don't think Chicken Run will turn kids to veggies any more than Peppa Pig. Well, 24 years later, the much-anticipated Chicken Run sequel is here, and it's already ruffling some feathers prior to its release. Now, I must clarify, when I heard about this first, it confused me because when there are boundary changes, politicians, sometimes MPs, move to safer seats, and they're accused of doing the Chicken Run. I thought we were going to do a programme on this, because I'm obviously always thinking about politics, but no, on this occasion we are in fact talking about the latest animated film, which activist groups have hailed as the morality tale that it hopes could spark a rise in veganism. The film's director turned vegetarian himself after working on the project, which focuses on the treatment of chickens in battery farms. So will this finally, after 400 years, dash Henry IV's hopes? Well, I'm joined now by a friend of the programme, Senior Marketing Manager at PETA, Margarita Sokova. Margarita, thanks so much for coming in again. Do you think that this will have an effect, that people will see Chicken Run and they will worry about battery hens?
Good evening, Jacob, and thank you for having me here again. And you know, I personally can't be more excited to watch this movie, and everyone at PETA as well. And as we heard, it has a very strong animal rights message, just as the first Chicken Run. And you know, it shows chickens as different personalities. It shows them as individuals. It shows like really strong characters. And it's true for real life chickens. It also shows that chickens on farms are treated and valued just based on their usefulness to humans. And that's true for real chickens as well. And they all were destined to be butchered and eaten. And again, it's so similar to real chickens. So I'm pretty sure that this movie will change hearts of so many people. And you know what? It's easier than ever to help real chickens. It's easier than ever. There are so many fantastic vegan chickens alternatives available that are full of nutrients, that are easy to find. So yeah, I'm confident that this movie will make a big impact.
I've been to chicken farms. I've looked around them. I've looked around free-range ones and caged ones. And it seems to me from looking at them that as long as the cages are big enough, the chicken has a perfectly contented life, that it gets fed, it gets watered, and crucially, it doesn't get attacked, that if the cages are too small, or in free range where there isn't enough space, which is usually the case, they get attacked and pecked at by other chickens and lose their feathers. But caged in sufficient space, it's not actually cruel.
Well, you know, it's great we are talking about the conditions of what chickens experience when they're on farms, but it doesn't matter what farm chicken comes from in the end of their life. And usually when they're just about 6 weeks old, really, really young, they're sent to a slaughterhouse where they're gassed, where they're electrocuted and their throats are slit. So it doesn't really matter where they're coming from. There is no humane way of killing an individual who doesn't want to die.
But chickens aren't individuals, they're chickens, and to give them personalities isn't really accurate, is it? That pigeons are famously unintelligent.
No, they are absolutely fantastic individuals. And, you know, just like you and me, they can, you know, experience a huge range of emotions, from love to fear. They definitely feel pain. Scientists have proven that they can see dreams when they sleep. And I know you care a lot about your family and your children. And chickens, they're amazing parents when given the opportunities. Chickens, hens, they start communicating with their young ones when they're still in the egg. So they are fantastic, they're intelligent, they're very, very, very social, and they're way more than a collection of body parts. So they deserve to be left in peace. And you know what? I have actually something for you.
Oh, you're very kind.
Yeah.
Christmas.
You know, as I was saying, it's Christmas time, and you don't have to eat chickens. I brought some vegan chicken for you. So you can try this fantastic vegan chicken that has all the flavor, all the taste, but no cruelty. And you know, I just did a little shopping around here. This is sold just across the road. This is from local Tesco's. It's so easy to find. So if you enjoy the movie, if you sympathize with the characters in the movie, then just go buy vegan chicken.
That is extremely kind and generous of you, particularly today, as I forgot to have any lunch. So I'm a bit peckish at the moment, not to make a
lunch for today and for tomorrow sorted.
But aren't you missing out one thing? That is to say that if the chickens weren't bred to be eaten, they wouldn't actually live at all. That nobody's going to breed chickens just for the sake of it.
You know, it's up to us humans. We are breeding chickens to live really short, really miserable lives, crammed on big farms. And there are 50,000 chickens crammed together. It's like the human population of Durham. Imagine so many individuals crammed together in a single space, living their own waste. Many die here. They're prone to diseases. And then again, they're killed just to become, you know, nuggets for us. So it's us humans who are breeding these chickens. And I don't think it's fair to breed them to this life of misery.
But that's the whole fact of being top of the food chain, is that we get to eat chickens, chickens get to eat corn, other birds eat worms and so on. That's just how nature operates.
You know, there is this beautiful saying, we are not ranked, we are linked. So it's speciesist to think that there are, like, you know, different levels of importance for different, you know, animals. We are all linked, and, you know, humans, chickens, dogs, cows, they all deserve to live, and they all are sentient.
One thing we can agree on is I know that my daughter's dog is more important than I am. Anyway, certainly in the Rees-Mogg family. Thank you very much, Margarita. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, you're not going to have chicken on your bill of fare tonight.
No, I had it for lunch. So I have got the Rwanda bill fallout, OK? So, yes, it does appear that the One Nation lot have spoken. What are the ERG saying? Nigel Farage has pocketed £1.5 million large from ITV and immediately used his platform to say he's ready for war with their director of television, which you love to see. Gary Lineker has kicked off again. Is Joey Barton right about female pundits in football? Harry's been ordered to cough up for the Mail on Sunday's legal costs, and Humza Yousaf has gone rogue on Gaza. Heck of a lot on tonight. Oh, and I'll have a special guest at the end. I'm not sure my panel will stick around for it, though, unfortunately.
That all sounds very exciting, other than Gary Linklater, who must say he's become a bit of a bore. But there we go. That's all coming after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset. Oh, it's absolutely glorious, lovely, perfect, ineffable and charming. You will enjoy it if you're there enormously.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. After
Most of us had a dry Monday. Expect some heavy downpours tomorrow, thunderstorms possible and some gusty winds. Thanks to this area of low pressure, slowly but surely it's been heading towards us over the past 24 hours and now providing some pretty heavy rain across Northern Ireland, where it's likely to linger for most of the night, and that could cause some disruption. So we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Elsewhere, the rain does tend to move through, but could drop quite a bit of rain in a short space of time as that band crosses England, Wales into southern Scotland. Touch of frost possible in northern Scotland for a time, but generally temperatures rising as the night goes on. And the rain moves into northeast England, southeast Scotland first thing tomorrow, and then it kind of lingers again for most of the day. So again, because it's been so wet, that could cause some issues. Further south, there'll be showers, heavy showers, the potential for some large hailstones as these showers drift through. They should move through because it will be quite blustery, and if it brightens up we could get up to 12-13 degrees, but feeling a lot cooler than that, 7 or 8, with the more persistent rain over southeast Scotland and northeast England. That slowly fizzles on Tuesday night, but stays fairly damp across eastern parts of England on Wednesday. Elsewhere, looking much brighter and drier, and that is the theme for the second half of the week. Low pressure systems disappear and a high moves in, promising a lot drier weather for most of us for the second half of this week.
That warm feeling inside from boxed boilers.